remember, we're always going to be in the minority. There's a lot of Republicans in these two chambers in the legislature, but it hasn't made a lick of difference. If anything, according to the conservative index, we're more liberal now than we were when we had gridlock and had Democrat control at the end. So ignore the R's and the D's. We've got to find a few great people of character, champions like Nehemiah and Josiah, that are going to hold up the standard and try and do what's right no matter what, and know that it's an uphill battle. And guys, we're right in the middle of all of that. You know, we have connections in all these groups, so we can encourage people in these different groups, hey, set aside this issue for a moment, or at this time, at this season, and let's get this one person elected who can make a difference, whether that's the governor or Paul Blair or whoever it might be. So Dan Fisher served in the legislature for a number of years until he got sick and tired of it and decided he was going to quit. And we just want to give him this opportunity to exercise a little bit of catharsis and talk about what was good and bad and ugly about his experience. And we're not going to tell you what to say or what to talk about. Please just come tell us about your experience, Dan Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys. One of the things that I do want to underline that John just said, I think sometimes we think there are more of us than there are. Now, that's not intended to be a negative statement, but many of you are at other groups that I've spoken to. Okay, and that's okay. That's fine. I'm glad that there's overlap, but just understand that there are not as many of us as we sometimes think there are, because we're running in circles of like-mindedness. Now, that doesn't, I'm not saying that to discourage us. We just need to be realistic. And I think for my 4 years in the House, and since I decided not to run again for re-election, at least for now, I've had a chance to think through some things. I don't think that I'm a pessimist or an optimist. I think I'm a realist. And I really believe that we all must stop for a little while and become realists about some things. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm not here depressed or upset or angry or anything like that. I have read the last chapter of the book, and I know how the story ends, right? But there are some sobering realities that we're facing right now that I think we better go ahead and deal with. I tell my people often in my church that you cannot deal with life until you have first dealt with death. If you have not individually dealt with death and what's going to happen to you when you die, because the death rate is 1 for 1, other than 3 people that I know of. A man named Elijah, a man named Enoch, and a man named Jesus Christ. Other than those 3, the death rate's 1 for 1. Until you can deal with death and deal with eternity, I'm convinced you're really incapable of dealing with life. Okay? Now, you might call that a pessimistic outlook. I call it a realistic outlook. And of course, because of the Lord and because of the gospel and His death, burial, and resurrection, we've read the last chapter of the book. We know how the story ends, and that's wonderful. Okay, given that, I think we need to be realistic about a lot of things. Now, this is a luncheon. A lot of folks who are younger than us. Now, there are some here that I would consider in the younger category. Most folks who are younger than most of us are working, and it's very difficult for them to get to these noon luncheons. Quite frankly, sometimes it's even difficult for them to get to the morning luncheons or even the afternoon deals. It's very difficult. So I don't want to just broad brush. But I know you've done this. You have to look around the room. Our ranks are not growing among the millennials. And we're going to leave it to them. So whatever we're going to do, we better do it quickly. I'm 57 come August the 26th. That's not incredibly old. I used to think it was ancient. I now realize just how young 57 is, right?
Second that.
Yeah, but here's the deal. Look around the room at most of the events that you attend, and you'll notice that most of us are 50 plus. Now, that's not bad. That's okay. Generally, young people are kind of revolutionaries and they're against the system, and generally they don't vote real consistently, so that's just part of being young. Think back when you were 20 or 21. Now, a few of you may have been very, very engaged, but if you were kind of the exception. You were not the norm. It takes getting married, having children, and realizing what real life is about before you really begin to investigate your political beliefs and where you stand and become activist in one way or another. So part of this is just the cycles of life that everybody goes through. But at the same time, guys, our numbers are not growing. They're dwindling because we're dying. And we're not replacing ourselves at the rate at which we are dying off. Now, that's not a negative thing. It's just a real thing. And we better learn how to deal with that. Now, the good thing about, for those of us who call ourselves Christians, and probably most in this room do, although I realize this is not a church gathering, the beautiful thing is that we all know God did not necessarily call us to be successful in human terms. He called us to be faithful. And in God's economy, faithful is successful. Ultimately, we plant, we sow, we water, we hoe. God brings the increase. And as you read through that book that we've all read the last chapter of, you know, it's going to get, I believe, increasingly darker as the end times approach. You just can't avoid that. If you have the same view of eschatology that I have, then toward the latter days of the history of this planet, it's going to get incredibly dark. Now, like my mentor used to say, for Christians, it's gloriously dark. Because that means that the smaller the light, still the brighter it is, greater the darkness. Okay, so those are all realities. So my 4 years in the State House, and I'm not suggesting that there won't ever be other years. I still have 8 years of eligibility. Who knows what God is going to lead me to do. But most of you know my story. And I am convinced that the reason that we are in the state that we are in is not because of Democrat or Republican or changing demographics and all of that. We are here because of the failure of the church. The failure of the church to connect the dots for people. Now, I know we're all grown-ups and we can read for ourselves. But, you know, pastors will say, well, you know, I don't get up there and preach politics because I just believe my people are smart enough to figure it out on their own. Well, I notice they don't take that same approach toward the subject of tithing. Toward the subject of church attendance. They go ahead and explain it to them, right? Point by point. Our pastors have failed us. A large church in Oklahoma City that if I named the church you would know immediately, when asked if they would participate in the Protect Life, Protect Marriage effort, made the statement, we try not to oppose anything. All right, another incredibly large church, depending on what month you look at the polls and studies, is often the largest evangelical church in America. Now, for me, you have to stick your tongue in your cheek to say evangelical, but evangelical church. Their executive pastor was asked by a very strong pro-life group, are you all pro-life? Oh, yes, we're pro-life. They said, well, we noticed that you never preach against abortion. They said, oh, no, that's too divisive. We're not going to preach about divisive stuff in our church. We're all about bringing people in, not running people off. Now, these are two of the largest churches, not only in Oklahoma City, but in the state. Now, unfortunately, their opinion is a reflection of the majority of churches. George Barna did an official scientific study in 2014. He polled hundreds of pastors, asking pastors around the country why they will not address these political and social evils and issues that you and I are so concerned about. And why we're so active in politics, hoping to get people in office that hold the right convictions. He found that there were 10 responses that just kept reoccurring over and over and over. Out of those 10, of course, there were the two top responses. Now, some of you have seen this study, or you've seen me do a presentation where I give a little piece of this study. The number one reason that pastors gave why they will not touch these social and political issues from the pulpit is because they're afraid it'll hurt their attendance. The second most often reason given for why they won't touch these issues is because they're afraid it'll hurt their offerings. The fifth reason is they're afraid it will hurt their potential of building more square footage. So that means the size of their actual church building facility. So when you drill into what pastors believe, the church growth movement has dominated the thinking of the modern pastor. Church growth meaning that the only way that you can be successful is to be the pastor of a growing, large church. And so these pastors are willing to do anything to keep the people they have and to get others. And if that means watering down the message, then so be it. The Southern Baptist Convention of Oklahoma, the Baptist General Convention, turned Paul and our reclaiming group down when we only requested, not their endorsement of the Protect Life, Protect Marriage effort. All we asked for was the opportunity to buy ads in the Baptist Messenger. Now, the Baptist Messenger is the third most circulated publication in Oklahoma. All we asked for was the opportunity to purchase ads, and we asked, secondly, for pastors that pastor flagship Southern Baptist churches to take all the other denominations out of the consideration. Men like Kevin Clarkson, Blake Gideon, who were a major part of the effort, if they could write editorials periodically just to kind of give an update on what's going on. Both requests were rejected by the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma. The Director Treasurer and his executive committee voted not to allow Reclaiming to either purchase ads and or have people like Kevin Clarkson and Blake Gideon write editorials. Now friends, that's why you're seeing these numbers on this screen. That's why, unfortunately, John told the total truth when he said the reason people vote the way they do is not based upon principles and where this person stands. Generally, they don't know or care. It's name recognition, whether or not they think they know that person. It takes about 8 exposures in a campaign to get a person to believe that they think they know you. Now, those exposures can be yard signs, push cards, a visit in the home is, of course, the most powerful, newspaper ads, you name it. But it takes about 8 exposures. That's what the consultants will tell you. Until that person begins to think they know that person, and then they'll vote for them. But it's based upon who they know, who they like. Do they like the way the person looks? Do they like the way the person talks? Has nothing to do with principle. Now, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Abraham Lincoln, but right before he was elected, the first time around, he was campaigning, and he was talking about the issue of slavery. And I realized that he had modulating views on slavery. I'm not trying to get into that discussion. But he was talking about slavery, and he was complaining about the fact that he was being told that they couldn't talk about it anywhere. And I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He said, I'm told that we can't talk about it in church because if we talk about it in church, we're bringing politics into religion. He said, then I'm told that we can't talk about it in political circles because if we do that, we're bringing religion into politics. And so he said, pray tell, where can we talk about this evil? Now, he was right. So as a pastor, and as one who ran for office and aspired to be a statesman and not a politician, I know for a fact that the church has us in this place. And I see only one way to turn it around. Now, we've got to do what you're doing. We've got to try to support the right candidates. But guys, we are in a very, very precarious position. Maybe one from which we cannot extricate ourselves. I do not know where we are on God's prophetic timetable. I have my personal opinions, but that's all they are. But it appears to me that if something dramatic does not happen soon, we will lose our republic. We will lose it. Justice Thomas, Alito, and Roberts came out with an official statement yesterday based upon recent Supreme Court decisions. And here's paraphrased what those 3 very conservative justices said. They are coming after your religious liberty. They meaning the other justices on the Supreme Court. Now, these are 3 justices who are really putting their own reputations out there by saying that, because they're blowing the whistle on their colleagues. They're coming after your religious liberty. So what will it take to wake up the church? I think it's going to take something like that, unfortunately. Do you know, when I give presentations, a lot of times I'm doing things that are not necessarily a church-sponsored event. I spoke at a community-wide prayer breakfast down in Cleburne, Texas back in March. It was hosted by the large Bible church there in Cleburne, but it was not run by that. It's a community committee, and they do it every year. They have somewhere between 400 and 500 people show up at this prayer breakfast. So it was a well-attended event. I did the entire Black Regiment presentation, got the same response I get everywhere, standing ovation, people crying, people shouting, clapping, the whole deal. Someone came up to me after the event and apologized. And they said, I want to apologize because even though our church didn't put this event on, we hosted it. And our pastor got up and walked out during your presentation.
Oh, you're kidding.
Do you know who the only people are that walk out on my Black Regiment presentations? Pastors. It's pastors.
Wow.
The members come up to me weeping, asking me what to do about their pastor. I had a lady just south of Shawnee, Oklahoma, come up to me after I spoke about 2 years ago. She was crying crocodile tears running down her face. And she said, what do I do? How can I find a Black Regiment preacher in my area like you? And I said, I don't know. I don't know where there are any in your area. I said, why do you ask? She said, 2 weeks ago my pastor got into the pulpit and said, now that same-sex marriage is a political issue, I will not preach on it again because I can't preach politics in the pulpit. She said, what do I do? I said, that's easy. Leave that church now. And find one where the pastor not only has courage, but he has a spiritual brain. Okay, so I see us as facing some incredible things, and I want to tell you just very quickly about my experience in the house, just so you can kind of know what we're facing from the inside. Some of you already know, maybe all of you do. Okay, first of all, I think that we're facing something that is, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's cataclysmic, I really believe. I believe that America, as we know it, is irreconcilably divided. Now, I've been a pastor all of my life, and I have counseled numerous couples. I never have told couples to go get a divorce. I have told women sometimes to get a legal separation because the husband was threatening her physically and the children. As far as I can remember, I've never told any couple to get a divorce, although I will tell you, I have counseled couples that I believed were going to get a divorce. One of the members was cheating on the other one, and there's no reconciling something like that. They were irreconcilably divided. If you look at the culture in America, we are irreconcilably divided. Let me give you 2 examples. One would deal with the First Amendment, primarily religious liberty, and the other would deal with the Second Amendment. Now, I want to illustrate this to you. For those of us who hold to Judeo-Christian principles, and for those of us who call ourselves born-again Christians and really embrace biblical principles, we are diametrically opposed to the murder of the unborn that's called abortion, but it's just baby murder, in my opinion. We're also diametrically opposed to redefining the roles of the sexes. Now, we don't want to go into people's bedrooms and tell them what they can do, but we're diametrically opposed to public force enforcement of the redefinition of marriage. The president just put forth a decree that restrooms are now open to both sexes on national parks. The transgender decree just a few weeks ago. I'll tell you about what happened in the House this year so you'll know why we don't have a bill this session. Just think about those things. For those who believe that sex means nothing, and what I mean by sex is male and female, and those of us who believe that sex is a godly ordained distinction that is a part of His intrinsic design for life, how will you ever reconcile those 2 diametrically opposed views? See, you won't. Okay, let's go to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is, of course, critical because it gives us the ability to protect all the other liberties, right? Now, for those in the Northeast and out on the left coast, they don't believe that any American should own a gun, period. They believe the only ones who should have guns are police officers, and they really would prefer those police officers to be like the British and just carry nightsticks. That's what they prefer. And that way, if some jihadist wants to cut your head off, like he did in England, you can't defend yourself well enough, and the policeman lost, he was actually a soldier, lost his head. You remember the story. Okay, now, compare that to those who believe that we have a constitutional unalienable right, thus ensconced in the Constitution, but given by God to defend ourselves and to own firearms. How are you going to rectify those two diametrically opposed views? No firearms, we believe you ought to be able to carry openly constitutionally, right? How are you going to rectify those two divergent views? I tell you, you're not. So what happened with Great Britain the other day with the EU and Brexit should be a lesson for us. That was the European Union. We're part of an American Union. If you read the preamble to the Constitution, it does not say in order to make a strong nation. It says in order to do what?
More perfect union.
A more perfect union. When I say the Pledge of the Allegiance to the flag now, I do not say one nation under God. I say one union. We are a union of sovereign states. I was just interviewed 2 days ago about the recent decision of the Supreme Court to throw out the Texas abortion law. That law actually was a law that would have favored the mother, because what it said is doctors had to have admission privileges in a local hospital to be able to perform abortions. Now, I realize that the end goal of the law was to reduce abortions, and by the way, it was shutting down the abortion clinics across Texas.
That's right.
I was interviewed about it, and they said, what do you think about it? I said, well, fundamentally, I'm pro-life, and I believe that the abortion of a baby is nothing more than the murder of a baby, so therefore I would be against it across the board. I said, but really, the real question here is state sovereignty and state laws. Because in the end, abortion is a state's issue to begin with. The Supreme Court did not have jurisdiction to do what they did. And by the way, all of our great Republicans in Congress, for all of these years, could have stripped the Supreme Court of jurisdiction on that particular issue and overturn Roe v. Wade in a week.
We can do it tomorrow.
Yeah, we could do it tomorrow. So don't buy this stuff from all of our representatives and senators from Oklahoma, either present or past, that there's just nothing they can do about it. There's everything they can do about it. They still have the guts to do it. So I told the interviewer, I said, look, the issue is whether or not states matter. Do states matter or do they not? The Supreme Court just told Texas states don't matter. You don't have the ability, you're either not smart enough or you don't have the authority to make rules for your citizens. Now, of course, you read Federalist 45, Madison said the exact opposite. Do state borders matter? Do state capitals and legislatures and chief executive officers and court systems, do they matter?
Thought you were a Baptist.
I have 1 foot on the floor at all times.
Where'd you learn that?
In the legislature. Anyway. Because they dance all the time, let me tell you. And so the real question in that decision was whether or not states matter. I made that argument from the House floor 4 years ago in the Obama nullification bill that I was privileged to be one of the authors of. And I argued that if our laws do not matter in Oklahoma, and all we really are is just a rubber stamp of federal laws, we need to get rid of the Capitol. Let's don't spend $200 million, which is now going to be way more than that, which we all knew it was going to be.
Sure.
Let's sell that building, make a great museum. Let's get rid of all the legislators because it saved tons of money. Let's get rid of all the state property. Just open up an office downtown and call it the federal office for the District of Oklahoma. I mean, really, in the end, that's what this argument is about. Now, I'm not here waving a rebel flag. I don't want to enslave people. Somehow we've got to shape that Lincoln legacy and stop thinking that secession means putting people in chains and firing at your neighbor. It means the right to free association is what it means. The Declaration of Independence was a secessionist document. We revere it, but they were seceding from Great Britain. Now, Great Britain just did that. There are other countries working on that right now. I'm just telling you, we better begin to rethink the way we approach this. We are never going to change Washington. It's irreparably broken. You can send all the conservatives up there you want, but there aren't enough of them to change anything. Now, let's translate that to our state legislature. The same is true there, but primarily, I believe, because we're under the federal cloud. If we could ever get out from under federal control, then we could go about the business of cleaning house at our state legislature. But as long as we're under that federal cloud and control, they're not going to do it because they're afraid they're going to lose federal funding. They're afraid the feds are going to come down and really put the screws to us. So they're not going to do anything to upset the feds. In fact, every time we suggested doing anything at the legislature, the 4 years I was there, of saying no to the federal government, they'd always say, well, what's it going to do to our funding? What's that going to do to the money? It was always the first question. Now, the 4 years that I was up there, some of you have heard this from other groups, so I'm just going to give the condensed version. For 4 years, I tried to get through that legislature an amendment to our state constitution that you would have had to have voted on, but we were convinced it would probably pass by 80% or more. That would have simply strengthened the section in our state constitution that we had called the right to keep and bear arms. It's very, very weak based upon Oklahoma case law. Right now, if the wrong case appeared before this particular state Supreme Court, they could outlaw handguns in Oklahoma. Right now. Our concealed carry and our open carry would be meaningless. They would throw handguns out in a second based upon case law in Oklahoma right now and the way our state constitution is written. It's in desperate need of being rewritten, that section. I got it through the House twice, only to have it killed by Republicans in the Senate. The first time around, Clark Jolly killed it. He wouldn't hear it. The second time around, it wasn't assigned to one committee. It was assigned to 2 committees in the Senate, which is unheard of. So even if it had cleared, it would have had to have cleared 2 committees. And you know the 2 committees they assigned it to? The same committees that throw everything else out. Okay, so wait a minute. I just confused the 2. That's the stem cell bill. When the amendment to fix the Constitution went to the Senate again, they killed it the very same way they did the first time. And what happens is they strike the title. That's what they did with the amendment. I apologize for confusing the 2. Both times they struck the title, and then of course they killed it. Now, the second example, which I just ran together on you, was the embryonic stem cell bill. Twice I got it through the House. That was the one that Clark Jolly refused to hear the first time around. Second time around, they assigned it to 2 committees. Now, I want you to think about this. Embryonic stem cell. I realize that would have just been a small sliver of what's going on in abortion. In fact, many were saying, well, it doesn't even happen in Oklahoma, but it ought to be real easy to pass a law against it, right? Couldn't get it. Second time I got it through the House, they sent it over to the Senate, and they assigned it to 2 committees. Now, this would have been appropriate in the Human Health Committee, right? Public Health. They put it in the Public Safety and the Appropriations Committee. Well, they're not even proper committees for that bill. But you see, those 2 chairmen wouldn't hear it. Now, the first time around was kind of interesting because the reason it died in the Senate is because Brian Crane from Tulsa wouldn't hear it. You know why Brian wouldn't hear it? Senator Crane? Because Tony Lauinger wouldn't approve it. He told me point blank in his office that if Tony Lauinger, head of Oklahomans for Life, would not even publicly endorse the bill, just tell him that he was behind it, he would hear the embryonic stem cell bill, and Senator Burkeen said, I guarantee you it'll pass committee, and it gets to the floor of the Senate, it'll pass. Tony Lauinger knew that. In fact, meaning Senator Burkeen and I, met with Tony Lauinger in Burkeen's office and did everything we knew to do to get him to not endorse the bill, but just approve of it, and he refused to do it, and that bill died.
Wow.
He said because the National Right to Life Committee had decided that it's more prudent to fight abortion on the end of the pregnancy, end of it, than at the beginning. I said, you know what I believe? We ought to fight it at the end, the beginning, and all in between. So the head of Oklahomans for Life was actually the one who killed that bill the first time around. I'm just telling you guys what goes on the inside. This kind of stuff goes on constantly. Your enemy is not the Democrats. Your enemy is the Republicans. Okay, now, transgender. Obama did his decree about 2 weeks before our session adjourned. That was the same for many states around the country, and that's why they time these things that way. There's little time to respond. The only way that we could have gotten a bill that would have dealt with transgender that late in the session was to have the Speaker of the House and the Pro Tem of the Senate both author a bill. You know what? They did. It was incredible. We couldn't believe they both agreed to it. Hiram Sasser, a Christian constitutional attorney, told us the best way to attack this is not to use the North Carolina approach. That's the approach I wanted to use. That one is no way, no how. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. He said, no, what you need to do is force Christian accommodation. If they're going to accommodate transgenders or any other group, they have to also accommodate Christians whose deeply held religious beliefs are conflicted because of this. Okay, the group met together in Burkeen's office and they all wanted to take that approach. I disagreed, but I said, hey, I'm going to be part of the team, so let's go for it. I became the one who was going to present the bill for Speaker Hickman. Speaker Hickman immediately started pulling his name off the bill. Now, he never got it off the bill because there was never any official action on it, but he was already removing his name. That hurt us tremendously. In fact, Pro Tem Bingman, I'm told, felt betrayed by Speaker Hickman because his name was on it and Hickman was in the process of removing his name. Now, he gave me the reasons, but they didn't make any sense. Okay, so I present the bill to the Appropriations Committee because we're so late in the session. That's the only committee that can hear the bill. I have 14 Republicans in that room, 6 Democrats. Now I'm thinking, wow, I got this thing done. Even if I lose a couple of Republicans, I'm in good shape. About an hour and a half of Q&A, mostly all from Republicans. We voted. 4 Republicans flipped, voted with the Democrats, and tied it 10-10, and they killed the bill.
Do you remember their names, Dan?
I do remember their names. Charlie, I'm glad you asked. Earl Sears, Leslie Osborne, Dennis Casey, and Harold Wright. Those are the 4 that flipped. And they killed the bill. That's why there was no legislation that came out of the legislature this session on transgender. That was our one chance. And Republicans, not Democrats, killed it. Back to the gun law, the constitutional amendment. My first time around, it made it all the way to conference committee. The conference committee had 16 members, 11 Republicans. You only need a simple majority in conference committee to get a bill out. So a simple majority of 16 is 9. So I thought, well, this is going to be easy. You got 11 Republicans, I only need 9, and all 11 had voted for it when it was on the House floor. I could only get 7. I could only get 7 Republicans to sign that out, even though all 11 had voted for it when it was on the House floor.
Do you remember the names of those that flipped, Dan?
If you give me just a second, I'll get up to it.
No, that was coming.
DeWitt, what was DeWitt's first name?
Dale.
Dale DeWitt, Elise Hall, Dustin Roberts, Mike Christian. Those were the 4
Running
that
for sheriff, isn't he?
wouldn't sign it out.
Pro Second Amendment sheriff, I'm sure.
Yeah, and of course they all got to go home and tell their constituents that they voted for it when it was on the House floor. And yet they voted against it in conference committee. That's the way they do it all the time, guys. So your Republicans are the ones who are killing it. Now, I know we would argue they're not true Republicans, but I think they might be now. See, I think they probably are a reflection of the Republican Party today. Now, I don't know what to do. And that's why after 4 years of trying to do what should have been pretty much a slam dunk in Oklahoma, with a majority Republican-led legislature, and in all the statewide offices, you have Republicans holding those offices, You have a pro-life governor who vetoes the strongest pro-life legislation she's ever seen. And then the Senate adjourns early on the last day when we are desperately trying, Nathan Dom and I and Josh Burkeen are trying to get the Senate to pass a veto override so it could go over to the House because we had the votes to do it. And the Senate adjourned early so they wouldn't have to do it. Same thing happened on the state standards fight. You know, I was helping lead that. And we had a bill in the Senate. It wasn't as strong as what I wanted, but it would have been something. And the House once again adjourned early on the deadline day so they wouldn't have to deal with that. And the state standards went right on through. And you know the mess that we have now.
Senate adjourned early.
Yeah, the Senate. What did I say? The House? Okay, it was the Senate. Both times the Senate adjourned early so they wouldn't have to deal with those issues. And we were left hanging. That's why we couldn't override Mary's veto on the abortion bill. The Senate didn't have the guts to do it. And I think they had the votes to do it. So that's where we are, guys. Now, how did we get here? I'm telling you, because churches won't speak out. You just said a while ago, John, I know I need to wrap it up. You said a while ago that one of the reasons why I was so successful, and I'm convinced it was, is because of my church. I couldn't have knocked all of those doors as many times as they were knocked, but I had about 100 people from my church helping. I mean, literally helping. Well, you knock a lot of doors if you send 100 people out into the community. How many churches do that? Hardly any. Because those pastors are so afraid of conflicting this myth of separation of church and state. Our founders would have never bought into a lie like that. The Black Regiment so didn't believe it that one of the historians who writes about that period of time, John Wingate Thornton, in 1860 said, the fathers of the Republic did not divorce politics and religion, but they denounced the separation as ungodly. Now what are we told today? The exact opposite. We're told if you mix politics and religion, that's ungodly. It's the exact opposite of the founding generation. Had it not been for the Black Regiment, the America we've known for most of our lives would have never come to be. I don't know what would have come to be, but it wouldn't have been what our history tells. So we're facing a moment in history where one of two things is going to happen. Either a handful of states are going to say, we've had enough. We don't want to shoot anybody. We don't want to fight anybody. We don't hate anybody. But we've had enough of the federal government making us irrelevant. And we're going to stand up and start saying no. And enough of us will do that either the feds will back down where they ought to be, or you'll see Brexit happen here in this union.
Great.
Or we're going to become irrelevant. Now that may happen. Yeah. It may already have happened. And you may have to suffer for your own religious beliefs. I'm telling you, if things do not change, guys, it won't be in my children's lifetime or my grandchildren's lifetime. It will be in my lifetime.
That's right. Totally true.
You will be persecuted for your faith. They'll do it through taxation and all the kinds of ways. But we are going to be persecuted. So one of two things is going to have to happen. You're either going to see a dramatic change in the way we think, or we just might as well accept that we just came to the game too late. And we go down swinging for what is right. We never stop. I'm not telling you ought to stop. I am going to go down swinging all the way down. I told someone the other day that if this plane is crashing that I'm on, I'm going to scream and swing all the way to the ground. I'm going to do what's right. But if we're going to do anything that's going to change the tide, we better hurry. And politics as usual is not going to get it done. It's just not. Even right here in our own state. They're getting away with murder and we're allowing it to happen. And we keep re-electing these jerks to go right back to Congress and right back to the legislature because they go out and say, I'm pro-gun, I'm pro-life. And then they go right over there to the legislature or up to Washington, D.C. and vote the exact opposite. They vote for the omnibus bills, which fund Planned Parenthood and all these other things, you know. So, my 4 years has been a wonderful experience. There were some good things, but I learned a lot. And I think I learned, or at least have really confirmed to me, what the real problem is. It's us. It's us. It's us. Now let me close with this. There'll be a lot of preachers who will say, well, you know, the Bible teaches that you're supposed to submit to the king. That's true. We don't have a king here. When Paul and Peter were writing, they were living under a totalitarian dictatorship. We live in a representative republic. It's not a democracy. It's a representative republic. And if we do have a king, you know who the king is? We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Guys, if we're going to render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and Jesus said we must, we've got to do our job. You've got to force your pastors, and if your pastor will not do it, leave that church. Stop supporting pastors who won't speak. I don't care how much you love them. I don't care how good of a guy they are. Stop supporting them, because guys like Paul Blair and myself desperately need help in our own churches. And I'm not saying you need to go to Paul's church or my church. I'm just saying guys like us, we need all the help we can get, because I promise you, within our own congregations, there are people taking pot shots at us every week because of the things that we say from the pulpit. My own denomination in Oklahoma has blackballed me and is blasting me. I received a very terse card from Anthony Jordan just about 2 weeks ago, because I had the audacity to tell my congregation what they decided concerning the Protect Life, Protect Marriage guy. He doesn't want people to know that. Well, but what I'm saying is we've got to have more guys like, that's why I'm so committed. The main reason I'm not running again is I'm trying to make this happen. Because I'm telling you guys, the church is our only hope. It always has been, but it certainly is now. And our only hope for our church is our pastors. They are the bottleneck. Stop going to a church where the pastor will not engage. If he won't engage, you can love him in Christ, but go somewhere and support a guy who will. You must do that. You must. I don't care how far you have to drive. You drive all over the metro for everything else anyway, right? So why does it hurt one more day of the week to drive across the metro? That's the answer. So, John, thank you for letting me vent. I hope it hasn't been all negative. I hope you know my heart. I'm in the fight till the end. When I get to the final part of my race, you know, Paul said, I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. I've finished my race. I tell my people all the time, I don't care how poorly I have run. I'm going to run until the very end. And when I see that finish line approaching, and I see that little ribbon, I'm going to lean into it. I promise you, if you're around, when I run the very last leg, I will be leaning into the finish line. I may not be moving very fast, but I promise I will be leaning into the finish line. That's what you and I must do at all costs, no matter what. He called us to be faithful, not necessarily successful. Thank you, John, for letting me in.
Dan, when you lean into that finish line, like many other great patriots before you, I hope it's on July 4th. Let me...
Not this one.
Not this one. Not this one, right. Very quickly, let me connect a few dots about some things Dan was saying. I'm trying to think of practical application. What do we do going forward? Dan's really been talking about secession. That's what he's talking about. And so here's my point. We won't do something really big and audacious and world-changing unless we first do it on a small scale in our own lives.
That's right.
And so I want to encourage you, when Dan says leave a crappy congregation, leave it. That's secession. And you'll never do any bigger version of it unless you do a smaller version first. You have to break away from those obnoxious family members that are holding you down. And then it goes to your church, then it goes to your community, and it grows and it works its way up to the state from there. There's an intermediate step that we talked about here when he talked about these two big churches in Moore and Edmond. that are put out with the Southern Baptist Convention, will they have the courage to leave that convention? They need to be encouraged to do that, because that's the next logical step on our way to state secession. Let's get there step by step. Okay, so second point. When I was putting the slides up earlier, I included the totals on the bottom line, the total number of votes. I did that on purpose because what I wanted you to see was that in every one of these House and Senate races, you only had 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people tops voting. That's not a lot of people. In 6 weeks, you can reach all of those people personally. Now, at the U.S. congressional race, you had 40, 50, 60,000 people voting in those races. That's why it's so hard to make a difference at that level. Local, close to home, close to your family is the answer. Fight in your families, fight in your churches, and fight for a good senator and representative, because you can reach those people. And finally, the last point I want to make is one thing we need to fight for is open government. Perfect transparency in everything they do at the Capitol. Because Dan illustrated perfectly the way they go behind closed doors and they take votes and they have discussions that are completely off record and they kill things and we never know about it. And that's exactly what happened to SB 1552. Yesterday I was in a meeting sitting right next to Darcy Yeck, a Republican so-called conservative from Kingfisher, senator. And I said, Mr. Yeck, thank you for voting the right way on the floor for SB 1552, but could you tell me in caucus, did you support voting for the override? You know what his answer was? I'm pro-life. Yes, but Mr. Yeck, did you support or call for the override vote? Well, I probably would have voted for it had it hit the floor. I said, Mr. Yeck, it didn't hit the floor because of you. We need open government. So Charles Key says we need some sort of measure in the Constitution or something. We've got to work on it, but we have to make it where every bill gets a hearing in committee and a vote. And every bill that gets out of committee gets a hearing and a vote on the floor. That's the next thing we have to fight for. Okay, folks, in a couple of weeks, we will be gathering here to vote on our legislative awards, the good, the bad, and the ugly, made real with real names on them. Don't miss that meeting. Do we have anything secured for next week yet?
Not secured, but...
Okay, well, it'll be good.
Tentative.
All right, everybody, see you next week. Thank you for being here.